Hello there, everyone, and welcome back to the GSL-English Podcast. My name is Gideon, and this is a podcast here to help you speak more natural, fluent, and confident English. And today, we're going to do that by looking at probably one of the most famous stories that has ever been written. Okay, so we are going to read a detailed summary of Frankenstein. Okay, now this is a really interesting story. So of course we're not going to read the whole book or the original version of the book because we would be here for a very long time. So we are going to study basically a summary of the story taken from sparknotes.com. So I'm going to put the link for that website in the description below. Make sure you check it out. They have honestly thousands of pieces of literature on there with study notes, guides. Absolutely fantastic if you are looking for something to read. But of course, today we're going to study one of their articles together. So as I said, we're going to look at a detailed summary of Frankenstein. Absolutely brilliant story. You might be familiar with it. I'm sure most of us are. But there may be some details within the story that you weren't aware of. Or maybe you know the premise, the idea of it, but you don't actually know the way it was written or the initial story itself. So we're going to go through that together in a moment. But as always, you are most welcome back here. Thank you for joining me. If you are watching on YouTube, you get a wave. And if you're listening on Spotify, I'm doffing my hat to you. I think that works. You can't see me doing it, and I'm not even wearing a hat, but that's what I'd like to do. So if you are listening on Spotify, you get a doff of the hat. I hope you're all doing well. I hope you've had a good week. I do apologise that there was no episode on Wednesday. I just ran out of time. The week completely ran away with me, so I just focused on this episode, which is going to be a good one. And if you are new here, then you're welcome. I create podcasts to help you learn English in a natural and authentic way. So don't forget to subscribe and just go back on all the previous episodes. It's going to change your life. It's going to change your English. So just go check it out. But let's get into it. I feel like there was something else that I wanted to say before we got into it, but I can't remember. It'll probably come back to me in a moment. And I'll just randomly make a statement amongst other things. So if that does happen, that's what I was going to say. But that's what I knew it'd come to me afterwards. That's what I was going to say. Grab a cup of tea, grab a cup of coffee, grab something a little stronger if you like, get some M&Ms, get some chocolate. My preference at the moment is mini eggs. I'm going through a real mini eggs era. Little reference to Taylor Swift there if you're a Swiftie. But I'm in my mini eggs era. Absolutely love them. So just relax. If you can, whilst enjoying this podcast, try and relax. Try and get comfortable. If you're on your way to work, then drive safe. Have a safe journey. But just enjoy this. So we're going to, as I say, read a summary of Frankenstein. And as we go through, we're going to look at the vocabulary, look at the story, and really see how we can improve our English. Just as a note, my pronunciation of Frankenstein will change throughout this story. I think it's supposed to be pronounced Frankenstein, but here in England, we generally just say Frankenstein. So I'm going to go with that because that feels more natural. But I do apologise to anyone out there that is offended by my pronunciation. So who wrote Frankenstein? Well, it was written by Mary Shelley, and she was just 18 years old when she conceived the story in 1816. Remarkable. She wrote this when she was 18 years old. But it was published anonymously in 1818. Published anonymously. So that means, there was no name. Don't know who published it. Because it was unsigned, many people initially, or at first, assumed that her husband, the poet Percy Shelley, had written it. However, the second edition, published in 1831, was credited to Mary Shelley. confirming her authorship. So there was a bit of a, confusion as to who wrote it, but it has been confirmed that it was Mary Shelley at just 18 years old. And I know I was looking at just a bit of details before this podcast, and actually the writing style or the writing itself of Frankenstein, it actually has real mixed opinions. Some like it, some don't. So if you have read the second edition or the original edition, please let me know what your thoughts are. So as I say today, we're just simply going to go through a detailed summary of the story. Okay, so we're going to take it paragraph by paragraph, see what we learn about the story, and also break down the vocabulary that was used. So read along with me if you're watching on YouTube, and if you're listening, just enjoy. Frankenstein. In a series of letters, Robert Walton, the captain of a ship bound for the North Pole, recounts to his sister back in England the progress of his dangerous mission. Successful early on, the mission is soon interrupted by seas full of impassable ice. So that sets the scene. So in a series of letters, so multiple letters, Robert Walton, the captain of a ship that is bound, that is destined, that is heading for the North Pole, recounts or tells the story to his sister back in England, the progress, how they're getting on with this dangerous mission. So it states here, that it was successful early on. The mission so far has been successful, but is soon interrupted, it is halted, it is disturbed by seas full of impassable ice. So if something is impassable, perhaps it's a road, it means that you cannot pass. You cannot make your way through. So in this instance, the ice was so strong and so much that it was impassable. They could not make their way through. Trapped, Walton encounters Victor Frankenstein, who has been travelling by dog-drawn sledge across the ice and is weakened by the cold. Walton takes him aboard ship, helps nurse him back to health, and hears the fantastic tale of the monster that Frankenstein created. So, of course, Walton, captain of that ship, is trapped. He can't go anywhere. Maybe you kind of imagine him wedged into the ice. There he comes across Victor Frankenstein, who has been travelling by dog-drawn sledge. So that means basically a sledge, that runs across the ice, that is pulled by dogs. It is dog-drawn. But clearly he's out perhaps somewhere that he shouldn't be. He's out somewhere that you wouldn't really expect to find someone. And because of this, he is weakened by the cold. How horrible the cold can be. Imagine being out there in the ice, weakened, fatigued by the cold. So Walton says, come aboard my ship. I'll look after you. So he helps nurse him back to health. We could use the phrasal verb, looks after him, gets him better, gets him back to good health, what he should be. And once this happens, Victor tells Walton the fantastic tale of the monster that Frankenstein had created. And it's very often misunderstood in this story that Frankenstein is the monster, but it is not. Here we have the character Victor Frankenstein. It's often a bit of a misconception. Victor first describes his early life in Geneva. At the end of a blissful childhood spent in the company of Elizabeth Lavenza, his cousin in the 1818 edition, his adopted sister in the 1831 edition, and friend Henry Clerval, Victor enters the University of Ingolstadt to study natural philosophy and chemistry. So, the first recounting or telling of the story, Victor describes his early life in Geneva. And he says, at the end of a blissful childhood, and when we think of that term blissful, it just brings emotions of happiness, of kindness, almost a naivety, just being a child. It's actually how I would describe my childhood. I was very fortunate. I had a blissful childhood, growing up in the English countryside, playing with my friends, roast dinners on a Sunday. It was blissful. It was lovely. Sometimes we describe certain situations as just being bliss. Oh, this is bliss. I kind of get the idea of being on a sunbed, on holiday, sun blaring, and you just got your swimming pool in front of you. Maybe you got a nice cold Coca-Cola or a mojito, something like that. You just describe it as bliss. You know what I mean? It's blissful. It's just that real inner happiness. So at the end of that childhood, the end of a blissful childhood spent in the company of Elizabeth Lavenza. Now, in the 1818 edition, this was his cousin, but in the 1831 edition, this was his adopted sister. So look out for which edition we are talking about. So him and his friend Henry Clerval, Victor, enters the University of Ingolstadt, and he's there to study natural philosophy and chemistry. But this is where it gets interesting / slightly weird for Victor. There, so at the university, studying natural philosophy and chemistry, he is consumed by the desire to discover the secret of life, and after several years of research, becomes convinced that he has found it. So it's interesting here. He is consumed by the desire to discover the secret of life. Recently did an episode on Leonardo da Vinci, and I think kind of we were talking about creativity. I put it in the link below. Leonardo da Vinci was consumed by the idea of perfection. And when we are consumed by something, it is all-encompassing. It is taken over us. It's all we think about. It consumes your thoughts, your emotions, your actions. So here, he is consumed by the desire, the want, the need to discover the secret of life. So that is just consumed by that idea, Victor Frankenstein. I need to understand the secret of life. How do we live? Why are we alive? He was obsessed with that idea. So after several years of research, he becomes convinced that he has found it. Years of research, I found it. Armed with the knowledge he has long been seeking, Victor spends months feverishly fashioning a creature out of old body parts. One climactic night, in the secrecy of his apartment, he brings his creation to life. When he looks at the monstrosity that he has created, however, the sight horrifies him. After a fitful night of sleep, interrupted by the spectre of the monster looming over him, he runs into the streets, eventually wandering in remorse. So he's armed with this knowledge. He's found the secret of life. How does it all happen? So he spends months feverishly fashioning, creating a creature out of old body parts. Okay. Then one climactic night. So when we talk about something being climactic, it is at the climax, kind of in my mind, I picture it to be all stormy. And I think in some renditions, or film renditions, it's stormy, it's lightning, the thunder's crashing, it's climactic. After all these years of research and development and putting these body parts together, it's climactic. Then, in the secrecy of his apartment, so in secret, no one else knows what's happening, he brings his creation to life. Now, this is that kind of famous bit in films, where I can't remember which version of the film I'm thinking of, but perhaps you've got the same image in your mind where he kind of pulls the big lever down, all the electrics in his apartment just kind of, all going off. They're all lighting up and things are banging, sparks going everywhere. And then he comes alive. It's alive. It's alive. It's kind of the famous quote. So he brings his creation to life. But then he looks at the monstrosity that he has created. A monstrosity is not good. An absolute monstrosity. He has created a monster. This isn't what he imagined. This isn't what he thought. He was just interested in life, understanding how it happened. But instead, this sight horrifies him. It's terrifying. It's horrific. It's dreadful. So after a fitful night of sleep, keep tossing and turning, not really sleeping properly, interrupted by the spectre, the ghost, the monster looming over him. So he wakes up and he's just got this monster that he has created looming, leaning, reaching over him. He runs into the streets, eventually wandering in remorse. Wandering, no particular place to be, in remorse, regretting, sad, just wishing that he hadn't done this. Victor runs into Henry, who has come to his study at the university, and he takes his friend back to his apartment. Though the monster is gone, Victor falls into a feverish illness. So he runs into Henry, who's going to study at the university, and he says, you got to come back to my apartment. You've got to come back. I've done something, Henry. It's not good. I've messed up. I messed up big time. You've got to come see what I've created. Goes back. The monster's gone. Victor falls into a feverish illness, basically just because of the stress, the worry, the panic, the anxiety of what he has created. And we're not talking about just like a normal-sized human. Frankenstein, unbelievably tall, wide. Google pictures of it, you'll get an idea. It's not the kind of thing that you want to stumble across. It's dangerous. So goes back to his apartment and says, oh my goodness, he's gone. So then he falls into this illness that has come from worry, anxiety. Sickened by his horrific deed, Victor prepares to return to Geneva to his family and to health. Just before departing Ingolstadt, however, he receives a letter from his father informing him that his youngest brother, William, has been murdered. Grief-stricken, Victor hurries home. While passing through the woods where William was strangled, he catches sight of the monster and becomes convinced that the monster is his brother's murderer. So he's sickened by his horrific deed. If we're sickened by something, we are appalled. It makes us feel sick. We can't believe what we have done. So he says, I've got to go back to Geneva. In my eyes, that's kind of just saying, I know what I've done. It's really bad, but I'm going to run away from my problems. So he runs away to his family and to health. I think that's quite a selfish move, in my opinion. Let me know what you think. But just before departing Ingolstadt, however, so he receives a letter from his father informing him that his youngest brother, so the youngest of all his brothers, has been murdered. Grief-stricken. If we are struck by something, it hits you like you've been smacked around the head with it. And this is how he feels with grief. The emotional pain that we feel when someone we love is hurt, injured, or in this case, passed away, been murdered. So he is struck with grief. He hurries home. But while passing through the woods where William was strangled, he sees the monster. What on earth are you doing here? So he becomes convinced the monster that I created is my brother's murderer. How do you deal with that? So arriving in Geneva, Victor finds that Justine Moritz, a kind, gentle girl who has been adopted by the Frankenstein household, has been accused. She is tried, condemned, and executed, despite her assertions of innocence. Victor grows despondent, guilty with the knowledge that the monster he has created bears responsibility for the death of 2 innocent loved ones. So he goes back to Geneva, and here, Justine Moritz, kind, gentle. If someone's gentle, they just kind of imagine with that kind voice, wouldn't hurt a fly. She's been adopted by the Frankenstein household. She's been accused. So they said, we think you did it. So she is tried, meaning that she is put under judgment, questioned, court to see whether she did it. She is condemned. So they said, yes, Justine, you are guilty of killing this man. So they executed him, despite her assertions, her absolute convictions of innocence. If you assert something, you are sure of it. There is no question in your mind. And she said, no, I'm innocent. They kill her anyway. Imagine how Victor feels at this point. Now the the monster that he created is not only responsible for the death of his youngest brother, but also this poor, kind, gentle girl. They are innocent, meaning that they had nothing to do with it. They had no part to play in this. Let me know. Who do you think is the most guilty? Is it the monster or is it Victor? It's kind of the question, isn't it? Hoping to ease his grief, again, very selfish, Victor takes a vacation, or in British English, a holiday to the mountains. While he is alone one day, crossing an enormous glacier, the monster approaches him. The monster admits to the murder of William, but begs for understanding. So hoping to ease his grief, I do get the impression that this Victor Frankenstein is a very selfish, very self-obsessed, very self-absorbed in his own emotions. So he goes to the holidays. I can't deal with this. I'm going to the mountains. But while alone one day, crossing an enormous, gigantic, humongous glacier, the monster approaches him. The monster says, yes, I did kill William. I did murder him, but please, I beg you, I plead for your understanding. Lonely, shunned and forlorn, he says that he struck out at William in a desperate attempt to injure Victor, his cruel creator. The monster begs Victor to create a mate for him, a monster equally grotesque to serve as his sole companion. Now, this is the interesting part, kind of the ethical and the moral dilemma that this book creates. He says, look, I was so lonely, I was so shunned, I was so forlorn, I was so just depressed that, you created me and then you left me. You brought me to this earth. You created me to be like this, to live on this earth, and then you just left me. So he says, well, I wanted to get back at you. You were cruel to me. You were unfair. So he struck out at his brother in an attempt to injure Victor. He doesn't know what he's doing. So he says, look, please just make me a mate, a monster equally grotesque. If something is grotesque, it's disgusting. It's horrible to look at. And he will serve as my soul, as my only companion. That's what he asks of Victor. Please, just do it. What was Victor's response? Well, Victor refuses at first, horrified by the prospect of creating a second monster. The monster is eloquent and persuasive, however, and he eventually convinces Victor. After returning to Geneva, Victor heads for England, accompanied by Henry to gather information for the creation of a female monster. Leaving Henry in Scotland, he secludes himself on a desolate island in the Orkneys and works reluctantly at repeating his first success. So Victor refuses, says no at first. Look what I've done with this one. I can't create another monster. It's not a chance. Not going to happen. But what's interesting here, it says the monster is eloquent. It is persuasive. If we are eloquent with our words or in the way we talk, we talk in a nice way. We use words appropriately. Our sentence structure is very well put together. And often eloquence brings persuasiveness. So he persuades Victor, he convinces him, just create me. If you create me a mate, then I won't bother anyone. I need someone. I need something. So Victor says, oh, all right, okay. So he goes back to Geneva, heads for England. After returning to Geneva, Victor heads for England with Henry. Then they start gathering information for the creation of a female monster. So then he secludes himself on a desolate island. Desolate, there's nothing else going on. No one else around. And works reluctantly. If we are reluctant to do something, we don't want to do it. After recording this podcast, I reluctantly have to clean my car. I don't want to do it, but I have to. So he reluctantly works at repeating what he's already created. One night, struck by doubts about the morality of his actions, Victor glances out the window to see the monster glaring in at him with a frightening grin. Horrified by the possible consequences of his work, Victor destroys his new creation. The monster, enraged, vows revenge, swearing that he will be with Victor on Victor's wedding night. Well, that's not scary. I don't know what is. So, you got Victor creating this monster and he goes, I can't do this. This isn't right. I shouldn't be doing this. He's struck Again, remember we looked at grief-stricken, comes across you quite quickly. He's struck, it's just maybe he's working at the monster and goes, what am I doing? This is madness. He has doubts. I shouldn't be doing this, about the morality of his actions. It questions all of his morals, societal morals. But while he's having these doubts, he looks out, glances out the window, and he sees the monster just glaring in at him with kind of a terrifying grin, a frightening grin. There's actually quite a famous picture of the monster, just staring through with this weird, awful smile. So then he's horrified, thinking about the consequences of his work. Now, this could be awful. I shouldn't be doing this. I don't know about you, but I get the impression that Victor's really quite a weak man. So what does he do? Destroys the new creation. He says, no, I'm not doing it. So the monster is enraged, filled with anger, and he vows. If we make a vow, we promise. It's an oath. Revenge. He says, I'm going to get you back. I can't believe you've done this. He says, I will be with you on your wedding night. Quite an ominous thing to say to someone. Later that night, Victor takes a boat out onto a lake and dumps the remains of the second creature in the water. The wind picks up and prevents him from returning to the island. In the morning, he finds himself ashore near an unknown town. Upon landing, he is arrested and informed that he will be tried for a murder discovered the previous night. So after he's done that with the second monster, Victor takes a boat out in the lake and he dumps the remains, the second creature, in the water. We need to be done with this. But then the wind picks up. When the wind picks up, it means that it builds up, it gets stronger, and it prevents him from getting back to the island. But in the morning, obviously just floats around, finds himself ashore in an unknown town. And once he gets there, he's arrested. And they said, look, you're arrested and you're going to be tried, questioned under a court for a murder that we've discovered the night before. Victor denies any knowledge of the murder, but when shown the body, he is shocked to behold his friend Henry Clerval with the mark of the monster's fingers on his neck. Victor falls ill, raving and feverish, and is kept in prison until his recovery, after which he is acquitted of the crime. So Victor says, what are you talking about, a murder? I deny it. I've got no knowledge of this murder. So they say, well, look at the body. It's his friend, Henry Clerval, but what marks around his neck? The monster's. The monster's big, grotesque hands. You can see the marks around his neck. So really now, this is the third death that has come from Victor. So Victor, once again, can't deal with the stress, the anxiety, the worry. He falls ill. It seems to be a theme with him. So he's raving, he's feverish, so stressed about this situation. He's sweating, he's got a fever. And he's kept in prison until he recovers. After which, he is acquitted of the crime. Meaning, okay, we're not going to try you anymore. We don't think it was you. Shortly after returning to Geneva with his father, Victor marries Elizabeth. He fears the monster's warning and suspects that he will be murdered on his wedding night. To be cautious, he sends Elizabeth away to wait for him. While he awaits the monster, he hears Elizabeth scream and realizes that the monster had been hinting at killing his new bride, not himself. So, gets married to Elizabeth, but he fears, remember what the monster said? I will be with you on your wedding night. So he thinks, well, this monster's going to kill me. So to be cautious, to be careful, he sends Elizabeth away. Go away and wait for me. I'll wait for the monster. But while he's waiting, he hears Elizabeth scream and realizes the monster's not actually trying to kill me, which would be what I thought he was going to do. He's actually killing my new bride. Victor returns home to his father, who dies of grief a short time later. Victor vows to devote the rest of his life to finding the monster and exacting his revenge, and he soon departs to begin his quest. So, now, is that the fourth? Killing because of his selfishness, because of the monster that he created. He is responsible for that. Oh no. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 now, because you've got the father here, died because of grief. So Victor vows, again we got that vow, a promise, an oath. to devote, to commit the rest of his life to finding the monster and exacting and getting his revenge. That's his only life goal now, and he departs on this quest. Victor tracks the monster ever northward into the ice. In a dog sled chase, Victor almost catches up with the monster, but the sea beneath them swells and the ice breaks, leaving an unbridgeable gap between them. At this point, Walton encounters Victor, and the narrative catches up to the time of Walton's fourth letter to his sister. So remember, you got Victor, who is being pulled along by a dog sled, and he's chasing the monster. But as they're doing it, the sea beneath them swells. You know, when a sea swells, there's movement. It's tidal, and the ice begins to break, and it leaves an unbridgeable gap between them. So you kind of imagine the ice breaking, got the monster on one piece, Victor Frankenstein on the other, and the gap can't be bridged. They can't make it across. So at this point, this is where we pick up at the beginning of the story. Walton encounters Victor. And this is where he's writing the letter to his sister. Walton tells the remainder of the story in another series of letters to his sister. Victor, already ill when the two men meet, worsens and dies shortly thereafter. When Walton returns several days later to the room in which the body lies, he is startled to see the monster weeping over Victor. The monster tells Walton of his immense solitude, suffering, hatred and remorse. He asserts that now that his creator has died, he too can end his suffering. The monster then departs for the northernmost ice to die. So there you go. That is a summary of Frankenstein. Very interesting, isn't it? So you get to this point here where Walton, he kind of takes over the narrative. And Victor, already ill, two men meet, he dies. Then he goes back several days later to the room in which the body lies, and he sees the monster weeping, crying over Victor. And the monster tells Walton, you know, this immense, this great solitude, loneliness, this suffering, this hatred and remorse that he's had for what happened. To be honest, I think the monster's pretty innocent. He was created and then just left. He didn't know what to do, did he? He asserts or puts across that now his creator's died, he too can end his suffering. Then the monster departs for the northernmost ice to die. It's an interesting story, and there's a lot of kind of ethical dilemmas in there, isn't there? But for me, the monster, okay, did some bad things, but he didn't know what was right and what was wrong. He was just created by Victor and then left to kind of just fend for himself. Victor is the enemy here, in my opinion. I could well be wrong. Let me know what you think. But really good story. And if you want me to go through more of these famous kind of books in this summary style, please let me know, because I love doing it. It's a good way to just get the base ideas for stories, for famous pieces of literature in your mind to understand them. And then I would encourage you, if you ever get a chance, read the actual thing. But the reality is life is busy. We often don't get time to read the full story. But now we know. Now we know what happened in Frankenstein. So, yeah, I hope you did enjoy that. As always, thank you so much for joining me today. I do appreciate it. For those of you that want an update on the office, we are nowhere near. I've not even started. Not even got myself a new desk yet. So I do plan on doing that. And this background will be more interesting very, very soon. So, yeah. Please give this video a like if you enjoyed it. If you've got any suggestions for future episodes, please do let me know. I'm always here to help, and I want to make content that you enjoy. But yeah, keep practicing your English, guys. Take it easy. Just enjoy it, and I'll see you all very soon. Have a good one, guys.